Hey, Charles, this is Sammy from Toronto.
Yeah, of course. How are you doing?
I'm good.
Live from the center of the earth, Girth.
That's great. Yeah, I haven't been to Fan Expo in a couple of years. I don't think I went last year, but I am coming back this year.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm excited. I always love going to that show. It's really fun.
All right, we're ready to rock and roll. Are you ready?
I am ready. Go for it.
Congratulations, Charles, on the publication of your debut novel, The Oracle Year. Is this as exciting as Killing Off Wolverine?
It is different than Killing Off Wolverine. I think in part because Killing Off Wolverine took a character away from the world, whereas The Oracle Year is introducing lots of cool, new, fun characters to the world. So, but having any book come out, comics, novel, whatever it is always an amazing experience. This one feels particularly special because I've wanted to get a novel out into the world since I was, little. Fourth grade probably is the first time I started thinking about it, and this is a story that's very personal and means a lot to me, and I think is something that people who like my comics work will also really enjoy, and I just can't wait. I can't wait for people to start reading it.
Cool. Yeah, it comes out April 3rd. For Oracle Year, what was the initial spark or what was the image? As you said, you've been kind of wanting to write a novel since you were 4. So what was the spark or what was the image for Oracle Year that you're like, this is compelling. I got to write all this down?
Right. Well, so before I got into writing full time, I was working as an attorney, a lawyer in New York City at a very demanding, it's just a very demanding career in many ways. And especially in the early days of that career, I was working very hard to also establish myself in some sort of creative career.
What flavor of lawyer were you?
I started out doing transactional and corporate work, so mergers and acquisitions, big investment deals, things like that. And then when I opened my own firm around 2004, I started doing immigration work, which is what I did all the way up through. Honestly, I still do a bit of it now, but I shut down my practice in late 2015. Late 2016, something like that. And then I just only spun out the last few cases that I had at that point. Some of which have kind of a long time on them, like years, but I'm almost completely finished, which is kind of a nice place to be. But at any rate, when I was in the early phase of that career, I knew that I wanted to have this creative field as my actual career, and so I was working so hard as a lawyer, but also working really hard on the side and burning up all of my free time in so many different ways. And I remember thinking how much I would love to have just been able to look ahead into my own future, honestly, to this point right now, to the point where it's just a few days before my novel's coming out and everything is so exciting, and be able to know that it was going to work out, that all the effort and time I was putting in back then would turn into this now. Obviously, that's impossible. You have to just sort of do your best and hope and work really hard. But it occurred to me then that, man, I bet we all have a question like that, right? Mine was, will my dream of being a creative person for a living come true? Other people's might be different things. Will the Blue Jays win this year? Will it be? That's a Canada reference, by the way.
There you go.
Will the?
You're so ready for Fan Expo.
Yep, exactly. Will my mother ever get better? Will I ever see this man again that I have this connection with? Just whatever the question is, I think we all have one, and so the idea of somebody appearing in the world who could hypothetically answer those questions for us seemed really compelling to me, and that's what generated the Oracle Year. That was really the spark. Was thinking about, hey, what if you could just send an email and maybe get an answer about your future, and then thinking about the person who was answering those questions was really the other side of the coin. This guy Will Dando, who's the main character of the book, who is the person who maybe can tell you about your future. So.
And then you mentioned like writing comics. So did you have to alter your visual approach in terms of writing a novel? Because it's a lot different than writing a comic book. I mean, like we mentioned Wolverine, Daredevil. Most people already kind of know who these people are. But with a novel, you're building everything from scratch. Oracle, you're set in exotic places like Uruguay and Denver, right? I always find that comics are like those kind of Duncan Hines cake mixes, right? While novels are kind of like baking from scratch.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty decent comparison. It's not my first. It wasn't my first go around working on creating worlds from nowhere. Like I'd done a fair amount of creator-owned work before getting into Big Two comics at Marvel and DC. So it hasn't all been established characters for me. I did a really long-running series called Letter 44, which is essentially a big, huge science fiction novel, and then I'm working on a big, huge sort of crazy, funny fantasy series called Curse Words with my collaborator Ryan Brown at Image. right now, and that's also kind of a big, a giant novel essentially in comic form, just created over the span of several years. So it's not something that was completely new to me, but I do think the difference between a comic experience or creating a comic versus creating a novel is that, I could write something like, okay, Ryan Brown, draw a park with some people having a good time, and then he will, and it will look incredible because he's extremely talented and knows how to do that. But it only cost me one sentence, right? But if I wanted to make the feel of that park in a prose version for a reader, I would have to go into much more detail about and choose the details that I wanted to use to convey the feeling of that park, what the time of year was, how warm it was, what people might be doing, anything else. It's all on me as opposed to having the help of the artist. And so that's a task in and of itself, is to fully and accurately describe the environment and give people what they need to set the theme. But it's also about choosing the way that you describe it and the style of description and the style of elements that you're going to give people is really, it's just a different set of muscles than comic writing. And they're both really fun and really cool, but I would say that's the biggest change.
You mentioned Letter 44, and I find that there's parallels between the president in Letter 44 and the president in Oracle Year, because both men just assumed they would have a traditional presidency. They pass some bills, maybe have a scandal or two, and then just kind of wrap up their presidency. But they both got blindsided by people that were, more, in a sense, more powerful than they were, and they weren't expecting it. And it's interesting because it's like, once you're the president of the United States, it's kind of like one of the most powerful positions, but in both instances, in both stories, they got upended by somebody kind of more powerful than they are.
Yeah, I love thinking about presidents. It's one of my favorite sort of, I was going to say fictional tropes, but it's not fictional. Presidents are real. But so learning about the history of presidencies and the way that these interesting people who choose to have that job, I almost think it's pathological to want to be president. But people do it. Obviously, people do it every 4 years, and they spend tons of money and work really hard to get there. So thinking about the types of people who would want that job and what the actual power level of a president is and the types of people or the types of events that could counter that power, that immense power, are fascinating to me. And I think it's just a really cool engine in stories. Not every story I write deals with presidential stuff, but it's clearly a theme I like coming back to.
I found that the theme was more like power rather than like president. I noticed the two presidents, but I feel like there's a lot of power because even like Daredevil, for example, you wrapped up two recent arcs. Was one where he goes to the Supreme Court and another one where Kingpin becomes the mayor. And so, again, those are both kind of dealing with power from different perspectives and different experiences.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that there is certainly a theme in the Oracle Year of power and what power is, how it's defined, and how you might choose to use the power that you have, whether that's big or small, and the power that Will has at the beginning of the novel. I don't want to spoil. Have you had a chance to read through it, or I don't know how much of it you've had a chance to.
Yeah, I read the whole thing. I liked it. It was a good, solid novel. And it's interesting because even though it's about an oracle, you don't see a lot of it coming.
Yeah, well, that's literally that was my game plan from day one, is to write a book about seeing the future that's extremely unpredictable. And the trick with it, as far as the power stuff, is that the main character at the beginning doesn't have very much power in terms of his ability to affect the world, but he knows things. He starts the story with knowledge of 108 things that are going to happen in the future. And then it's about how he slowly builds this structure of influence and power with just those 108 things, how each one is almost deployed like a weapon, sort of, or maybe that's a bad metaphor, because they're not all, like, he's not using them in an aggressive way, really. It's more just how he uses them as little points of influence to turn his life and to turn the world into something new.
It's also, the character Will, he is not somebody who necessarily is initially reaching for power. As you said, when you're talking about presidents, there's something kind of almost broken inside them that just like, I gotta do this, I have to run for this, I have to become the most powerful person. And Will is kind of like almost the opposite of it, and he's kind of thrust into a situation where now he becomes very powerful, and now he has to adjust to this newfound power.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think you nailed it. It's an arc that he. Again, I really don't want to spoil too much of the book. But
No, that's fine.
Things happen to him that he can't really anticipate, despite knowing things about the future. He doesn't know very much about his own future. And so that is again, kind of a fun dichotomy, I think, between what he knows and with respect to the rest of the world and what he knows about himself. He knows almost nothing about himself or his own future, and yet he is expected to do something with the things he knows about the rest of the world's future, which is kind of a fun place to put a character.
Yeah, it's a lot. I mean, we're going full circle back to the presidents. But once you become the president, you get that briefing every morning and tells you this is what Pakistan is up to. This is what this country's up to. And it's a lot of stuff that most of the mainstream kind of doesn't really know. And that kind of stuff is probably why a lot of them, their hair turns gray. They they have sleepless nights. And I mean, that's the thing. That's the revelation. So it's like you get to this position, but now you have more information, but in a sense, less power to control these events.
Yeah, I think that's right. Just knowledge is not always. I mean, there's a reason ignorance is bliss is a saying, you know.
Yeah, and switching gears to Daredevil, because this is your other kind of prominent work these days. Has Daredevil affected your relationship with the law? I mean, like you said, you went from like law school to wanting to be a lawyer to practicing law to even shutting down the office, as you said. Still maybe doing a couple of cases here and there. You've had a long affair with the law. Is it still kind of still there, even though as you start to see the nuances of the system, or has it kind of rekindled your love affair with the law?
I think the law is something I really like because I'm a guy who's interested in behind the scenes stuff, who's interested in thinking about the way that the world operates systemically. You know, so you think about a city street, and beneath the city street you have in New York anyway. I don't know if it's the same way up in Toronto, but in New York you have utility tunnels, you have manholes, you have wiring, you have piping, you have sewer. And then, of course, below that, you have the subway system and the huge transportation network. And all of that is below the surface of the street. And you can't see it, but it's all there and it's all vital. And I think that the law for society functions in much the same way. It is this extremely vital and complex system that unites us all, and we all, need it and think about it. And it's just a very, complex thing that we... It's one of the most fundamental parts of modern life is law. And so using it in lots of different lenses is fun. And Daredevil is one, She-Hulk was another, that's sort of looking at the law through a superhero perspective. But I also, I like writing about it in a more realistic sense, in sort of in something even like The Oracle Year has a lot of like legal stuff in it in the background. Like, what's the liability of predicting someone's future? And then if they take an act based on that, if they act in some way based on that prediction that has a negative consequence for them, are you liable for that damage or that hurt or whatever happened to them? I don't know. It's fun to think about, though.
Mm-hmm. In the Oracle Year acknowledgments, you write to Brad Meltzer, whose presentation to a Columbian School of Law IP class in my second year set me on the road to writing not just the Oracle Year, but everything else I've written too. Can you elaborate on that kind of inspiration?
Sure, absolutely. So Brad and I are both graduates of the same law school, Columbia, in New York City, which is a phenomenal school. And, I was very happy and lucky to go, and I would guess Brad feels the same way. And he had put out, he got into his writing career before I did, and so he had some books out and was already a bestseller. When he came to speak to my an intellectual property class, it was either copyright or trademarks, I believe. And so he came and spoke, and he was there for just an hour, and he gave he told us his story about how his work in the law led him to become a writer and to become a best-selling writer. And I found it extremely inspiring, and just to know that path existed was amazing, because when you're in law school, there's this enormous focus and pressure toward going to a big firm and practicing, especially at a place like Columbia. The expectation is that because you have the opportunity to go work at some of the city and honestly the world's most prestigious law firms, that you will. And I did. I went and worked at a firm called Raboul McMurray that was then later acquired by Ropes & Gray, which is one of the most prominent law firms in the country, for sure. But then I left because I knew that it wasn't going to be for me, and part of the reason I knew that it wasn't going to be for me is because Brad Meltzer had been there and talked about a different path that I thought was much more suited to what I actually wanted to do and be. And so if I hadn't had that happen, I don't know that I would have started writing my first novel, which is ancient history at this point. It didn't really go anywhere. But that led to getting into comics, which led to Marvel and DC, which in some ways, in a roundabout way, led to the Oracle Year coming out, because I had enough of a profile from the comics work that publishers were willing to take a chance on a novel from me. So it all really does. I mean, he's not the only person who has influenced my career, but he's a big one, and he is somebody who is really one of the nicest people I've ever met in my entire life. His generosity of time and spirit in his own work, for other people's work, is just unreal. So that is why he's acknowledged in the acknowledgments, and honestly, I don't know if I would be here without the stuff that he has done over the years for me.
Well, thank you, Brad. So why go down this, just to pick up on the thread that you're mentioning, like, why commit to being a lawyer? I mean, that's a lot of work. Most people who have a creative outlet on the side are like tend to end up in Starbucks or something kind of more cliche and traditional like that. But to be a lawyer, to go through law school, to even start working at a firm is an awful amount of work. And if you have this hunger for this creativity or this outlet, like, why dedicate yourself to that much work?
You're not wrong at all. You're completely right. The truth is, sometimes life has currents, right? Sometimes you find yourself pushed in a direction that you weren't necessarily expecting, and you turn around and you're like, wow, how did this happen? And I know that sounds probably a little naive and odd, considering we're talking about me going to law school for 3 years and then practicing law, but it didn't feel like that at the time. I mean, you get into a school like Columbia, and generally speaking, it's quite a big deal to turn it down. I was doing a lot of music work at the time as opposed to writing work, and I really wanted to be a musician, was kind of the path I thought I was going to be on before law school. And then we had some issues sort of with my family and different things that made it seem like stability and having a really defined path would make a lot of sense for me. It just seemed very appealing. And then and again, it's not like getting into Columbia and getting a Columbia law degree is ever going to be a bad thing. It's always going to be an asset to your life and career, no matter where you end up, pretty much. And so I did it. And then you get out and you have an enormous amount of student loans, and you need to think about a way to pay those back. And the easiest way to do it, or the sort of path of least resistance, is to get a job at one of those big firms, because they tend to pay pretty well, and you can start whittling away at the student loan balance. So it kind of all happened, and then the summer after graduating from law school, I took the bar exam, which is the big test you take. I don't know if there's a Canadian equivalent. I'm sure there is, but
yeah,
it's basically, this big test you take, and it takes several months to study for it and prepare, and then you take it over a period of 2 days, and you're so exhausted you can't even think when it's done. And people often take a vacation afterward. They'll just go sit on a beach for a week and do nothing because it's so grueling. And I did that, and on that trip, I stopped at a stationery store and bought a longhand notebook and started working on my first novel back then. So it was that early that I knew that I was on a path that I wanted to get off if I could. And so that brings us sort of full circle to that question that I was asking even then. Will this work out? Will this happen for me?
And it's interesting too that you want to go down music as well, because music and writing both are like, it's very much like you said, the Oracle year, right? Where like there's you need a lot of different breaks to kind of happen for it to make it happen. You need a lot of different people kind of depending on you. And it could be it's always the oddest things whenever you hear somebody who's successful in an interview and they're like, this is what happened, or this guy came to my class to speak or whatever. It's these little different sparks and these little different moments that all align to get the person where they are.
That's 1,000% right. It is not usually not one massive quick break. I mean, honestly, from that moment that I mentioned, the taking the bar exam and buying a notebook, to the point where I had my first real published book, was 9 years. So, and that 9-year path had a lot of moments of, man, why am I doing this? Why am I working so hard on this? Is it ever going to work out? But it also had a lot of moments of these little sparks where you're like, well, this is why I think I should keep going on this path. And even though, the big things, the big moments, the publication of the book or whatever, they don't happen every day, the journey, I think, is also very fun and engaging. I mean, I was writing all that time, and I was having all the joy of writing just for myself. Nobody else was really reading it except for, my family and close friends, right, were reading the things I was doing at that point. But there's joy in the creation, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a best-selling book or a big, huge published book to be worthwhile. And I think that's, if I had advice, I have a lot of advice to offer to aspiring writers and creative people, but I think that's it. If you can find joy in the experience of creating all the way through, whether it's profitable, whether it's anything more than you just making something, you can find joy in it, then you're always going to be fine, no matter how your career happens to be doing at at any given point.
Yeah, you're talking about like Lord of the Rings, where it's like it's the journey itself rather than destination. That's what you're celebrating.
Yeah. I mean, there's a reason that's I mentioned ignorance is bliss. I mean, it's the journey, not the destination is another saying, and it is for a reason.
So how do you introduce yourself at parties now? You've gone through these like really big identities as a musician, a lawyer, a comic book writer, and now a novelist. So how do you introduce yourself at a party? Like those are big, huge identities.
Hey, I'm Charles. If they push, I'll explain a little bit more. But it's just as easy to say, I'm a writer, and then what do you write? And then I usually talk about, have you heard of Spider-Man? Yeah. It's kind of like that. And then that's if they have more questions, I'll elaborate. But yeah, that's kind of how I see myself these days. Just a writer.
Cool. And last question before you go, as a music dude, is there any cool music that you've been listening to lately, or any music recommendations?
Yeah, I'm always listening to stuff. I'm listening to music all the time, different bands, different things. Let's see, I'm pulling up my music on my phone right now just to tell you a few that I've been enjoying. There's a band called Snarky Puppy, which is kind of a fusion jazz band, very intense. I like that. I've been listening to Max Richter's sort of reimagined Vivaldi's Four Seasons, which is a really inspiring, beautiful stuff. A band called Gang of Youth.
Yep.
St. Vincent record. Man, lots of stuff all over the place. I'm just, like I said, just sort of flipping through it. The new Jason Isbell, or sort of new Jason Isbell's great. Lots of good music out there.
Mm-hmm. It must be exciting just to be in New York City too, or and hang out there and just be able to soak up all that music alone.
Oh yeah, I just went to a concert on Sunday night. I saw that Gang of Youth band that I mentioned, and it's amazing. And there's always good shows every week. If you have time to go, if you want to go, there's always something.
So Oracle Year, congratulations on the publication. It will be out April 3rd, just in a few days. And you did actually something kind of fun for people that pre-ordered it. They got their own predictions.
Yes, they did. The idea, and that's still actually, I don't know when this is going to air. It's more, I was just thinking in terms of how I answer this question, because when I explain this, unfortunately, the offer will be closed. But basically, for people who pre-ordered the Oracle Year, and then sent HarperCollins proof of their pre-order, whether it's like a receipt or something, and then a mailing address, I sent out a postcard with a prediction of their future, a handwritten, unique, they're all different date, different prediction for every person who did that for me. And so that was a lot of people, and it was really, it took a lot of time to think of all those different predictions, but it's been really fun. I'm actually, as we speak, I'm going to look and see how many I have left. I think there's a number that I haven't done yet. So I'm going to check that out and make sure that those get done soon. But it's been fun, and you have to, whenever you're working on getting the word out, you have to be creative. You have to think of interesting ways to get people to talk and think about your story. And this seemed like something that was relatively simple for me to do. That would bear some good results, and that's how it's been.
All right. Well, we'll wrap it up now so you can get back to work and listen to some music and then write out those predictions. Thank you, Charles, for taking some time. Thank you for the book, The Oracle Year, and keep up the good work on the comic book stuff.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.